I've never been particularly fond of charity galas. The kind where $1,000 a plate gets you rubber chicken, a silent auction, and the privilege of standing around with people who talk loudly about how much they give. My wife Marlene lived for these evenings. For her, they weren't about the cause. They were about being seen at the cause. We'd been married 21 years. I built my structural engineering firm from a two-man shop in a rented office above a dry cleaner to a 60-person operation with projects in 4 states. Marlene had been with me through most of that climb, though somewhere around year 12 or 13, she quietly stepped off. Not dramatically, no fight, no announcement. She just redirected. The charity circuit, the garden club lunches, the weekend spa retreats with friends whose names I could barely keep straight. I told myself it was fine. Couples grow in different directions, as long as the foundation holds, right? That's what I do for a living, assess foundations. The gala was at the Westin downtown. A children's hospital fundraiser, black tie, and Marlene had been anticipating it for weeks. She'd bought a new dress, had her hair done twice because the first try wasn't right. I wore the same tuxedo I'd worn to 4 of these things, which she pointed out, with a look that carried weight but no actual words. I circulated the way I always did at these events. Slowly, politely, saying the right things to the right people, and retreating to the bar when the small talk got thin. Marlene was across the room, animated and laughing with a cluster of women I half recognized. Her 3rd glass of wine was already gone. That had become the pattern over the past couple of years. It started as 2 glasses and somewhere along the way became 4, and she got louder as the night wore on. And once or twice she'd said things at parties that I'd had to quietly smooth over the next morning with a phone call. I was heading toward the exit to get some air when I passed close to her group. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop, I was just walking. Her voice carried differently when she'd been drinking. Clearer somehow, like the filter that usually softened her words had been switched off. Nash just gets it, she was saying. He actually pays attention, you know? He notices things. I haven't felt like a woman in I don't know how long, and then this man walks in and suddenly I remember what that feels like. One of the other women saw me first. Her smile went wrong, then a second one turned. Marlene turned last. Her expression did something complicated, surprise, then a flicker of something that might have been shame, then an attempt at a casual smile that landed crooked. "Sweetheart, I didn't hear you come up." "You weren't meant to," I said. I picked up a glass of water from a passing tray, drank half of it, set it down, and walked out. I drove 45 minutes out of the city before I stopped at a diner. Not because I was hungry. Because I needed somewhere to sit that wasn't our house, and the house was the only other place I could think of to go. The diner was the kind with laminate counters and a pie display case by the register. A woman about 10 years younger than me was refilling coffee for the 2 other customers when I sat at the counter. Her name tag said Nell. She had a faint greenish-yellow bruise high on her cheekbone. The healing kind, not fresh, and she moved with the carefulness of someone who was still figuring out how much space they were allowed to take up. She brought coffee without asking. I didn't stop her. "Bad night?" she said. "Is it that obvious? You're in a tuxedo. People in tuxedos who come in here at 11 on a Friday either just got engaged or just had a very bad time. I just found out my wife has been seeing someone." She paused with the coffee pot in her hand. "I'm sorry." "Don't be. I think I knew for a while. I just hadn't let myself say it out loud yet." She refilled the cup of the man 2 stools down and came back. We talked for a while, about nothing that mattered particularly, the town, the menu, whether the lemon meringue pie was worth ordering. She said it was. I ordered a slice. She was right. I didn't ask about the bruise. Before I left, I put $60 under my saucer for a $12 pie and a coffee. She looked at it, and then looked at me. "You don't have to do that." "I know," I said, and left. I drove to a motel 20 minutes away, paid cash, and sat on the edge of the bed until 2 in the morning, thinking through what I actually wanted. Not what I was supposed to want. Not what looked right from the outside. What I actually wanted. By the time I turned the light off, I had something close to an answer. Nash Corbin was a real estate developer, around 40 years old. I'd met him twice at industry events. A handsome, confident type who talked about square footage and yield percentages the way other men talked about sports scores. I'd had no reason to dislike him before. Now I had a reason. I filed that away and focused on what mattered, which was not him. Monday morning, I called my attorney. Stanton and I had met when we were both 26, living in the same city. Him in law school, me in engineering school, and we'd stayed loosely in orbit for 30 years since. He was the kind of lawyer who wore the same 3 ties on rotation and remembered every favor owed to him with frightening precision. Marlene had always found him abrasive. I found him useful. "I figured something like this was coming," he said, which surprised me. I hadn't said what I was calling about yet. "How?" "Because you called me directly and not through my receptionist. You always go through the receptionist unless it's personal." He paused. "How bad is it?" "She's been seeing someone, real estate developer. I overheard her talking about him at a charity dinner Friday." "How long has it been going on?" "I don't know yet." "Find out. It matters for the financials." I spent the rest of Monday making quiet changes. My ownership stake in the firm was held through a professional corporation. I'd set it up that way years ago on advice I was glad I'd taken. I restructured the operating agreement to move certain assets into a holding company, registered in my name alone, which I'd established when we first incorporated. Marlene had signed a lot of documents over the years without reading them. That was her choice, made freely. I'd never taken advantage of it before. I was taking a narrow legal advantage of it now. My assistant, Bet, had worked for me for 11 years. When she came in Tuesday morning and found me already at my desk with a stack of financial documents and a second cup of coffee, she sat down across from me without being asked. "What do you need me to do?" she said. I looked at her. "You already know something's wrong." The calls over the weekend weren't subtle. She picked up a pen and clicked it once. "You want me to pull the travel reimbursements on the Corbin Consulting account?" I did. It took her 2 hours. Nash had submitted expenses through a consulting agreement he had with my firm, a minor arrangement I'd approved 3 years ago when our projects were running adjacent. 3 years of restaurant receipts, hotel stays in cities neither of our projects were near, spa charges, a long weekend at a resort on Hilton Head Island. All of it approved by Marlene, who had signing authority on the consulting account. Stanton's voice went very quiet when I sent him the documents. "She authorized payments to the man she was sleeping with. Through your company." "Yes." "That's not just infidelity, that's fraud." "I know." "Do you want to use it?" "Not yet. Keep it somewhere safe." I prepaid my son's and daughter's tuition, both in college, both doing well, wiring funds directly to their schools. I closed the joint money market account. I let the joint checking account stay open and funded because I wasn't trying to leave Marlene without grocery money. I was trying to protect what I'd spent 21 years building from being divided in ways that felt less like fairness and more like a reward for behavior I couldn't excuse. By Thursday, I'd done what I could from home. I drove back to the diner. Nell wasn't on shift that morning. I asked the man at the register if she'd be in later. He shrugged. I left a note with my number on it and the words "coffee's on me" whenever, and drove around the county for a couple of hours, looking at the hills and not trying to think about anything in particular. She called at 4 that afternoon. "I got your note," she said. "This is a little unusual." "I know. I'm sorry. You were kind to me the other night and I wanted to return the favor." "I poured you coffee." That was enough. A pause. "Are you okay?" "I'm asking because of the bruise." Silence. "Then my husband and I are separated. I left Raleigh 3 weeks ago. I'm still figuring out what comes next." "Is he the kind of man who stays where you left him?" Another pause, longer this time. "He came to the diner twice this week looking for me. I found out from a coworker." I thought about that. I have a furnished rental property about a mile from the diner. I've been thinking about listing it, but I haven't yet. You could stay there. No charge, no conditions. I'd only need it occasionally myself. "I don't know you." "That's true. You don't. I'm not asking for anything in return. I'm just a man in a tuxedo who needed a piece of pie and you were decent to him, and I'm in a position to be useful to you right now." She was quiet long enough that I thought she'd decided against it. "Okay," she said finally. "Okay." I gave her the key the next morning. The apartment was on the second floor of a Victorian duplex I'd bought as an investment 8 years back. 2 bedrooms. Clean, good light in the afternoons. She walked through it slowly and looked at everything like she was afraid to want it. I told her I'd call before I came by, that she should feel free to treat it as her own. Then I went back to dealing with my own life. Marlene, by that point, knew something was wrong. She'd noticed the money market account. She'd called 3 times while I was out of town, and once to the office which Bet had fielded with practiced neutrality. When I finally answered her call Thursday evening, she was quiet in that calculating way she had when she was choosing her angle. "Where have you been?" "Around." "We should talk." "Probably." Are you coming home? Eventually. She didn't mention the accounts. I found that telling. If she hadn't noticed, she would have been asking where I'd been, and nothing else. The fact that she didn't ask about the money meant she'd noticed and was deciding how to play it. The way she played it was a lawyer. Stanton called me Friday morning. Marlene had retained a divorce attorney from Charlotte, someone with a reputation for aggressive asset discovery, and had filed for an emergency order to freeze any accounts she could identify as joint marital assets. Most of those accounts were already empty or restructured, which I knew was going to make her attorney very interested in where the money had gone. She also filed a complaint with the state licensing board, Stanton said, alleging financial misconduct in the firm. On what basis? None that'll stick, but it creates delay and costs you time to respond. He paused. She's not going to go quietly. I didn't expect her to. What I hadn't fully expected was Nash. I found out later that Marlene had told him I had documentation connecting his consulting payments to their relationship. Nash, who had a pending commercial development deal worth several $1 million and a professional reputation that depended entirely on not being known as a man who'd had his affair underwritten through his mistress's husband's company accounts, did not react to this information rationally. I was coming out of my office at noon the following Tuesday when a man I'd never seen before was standing near my car in the parking structure. Stocky, mid-40s canvas jacket despite the September heat. He had the look of someone who'd been told to appear casual and wasn't quite managing it. "You're the engineering guy," he said. That's one way to put it. "A friend of mine thinks you should reconsider bringing certain documents into court. Your friend should speak to my attorney." My friend thought a more personal conversation might be more productive. I looked at him carefully. He wasn't reaching for anything. He was trying to intimidate through implication, which meant either he was a professional being deliberately restrained or an amateur who was bluffing. I couldn't tell which. "Tell your friend I'll think it over," I said, got in my car and drove away. I called Stanton before I reached the next traffic light. "Write down everything." Exactly what he said, what he looked like, time, location, all of it. Stanton was quiet for a moment. "Do you know who Nash uses for this kind of thing?" I didn't know Nash was the kind of person who used anyone for this kind of thing. Everyone's that kind of person under the right pressure. Let me make a call. The call Stanton made was to a contact at the county sheriff's office, where, it turned out, Nash Corbin was already a name in an active file. He'd been under quiet investigation for several months over a commercial real estate deal in which he'd allegedly diverted investor funds into personal accounts. The man in the canvas jacket was connected to that investigation, a low-level fixer Nash had used twice before on minor matters. They picked him up 2 days later on an outstanding warrant from another county. He gave up Nash within 48 hours because he had prior convictions, and the arithmetic wasn't in his favor. Nash, when confronted with both the investor fraud charges and a new charge of witness intimidation, did something I genuinely hadn't anticipated. He gave up Marlene. Specifically, he told investigators that Marlene had called him 3 days before the parking structure encounter, and told him that if I presented the consulting expense documents in divorce proceedings, it would expose her to fraud charges, and that he needed to handle it. He'd taken that to mean what he wanted it to mean. Marlene, in her own statement, said she meant only that he should reach out to me privately to discuss the situation. Nobody believed her, including her own attorney, who withdrew from the case shortly after reviewing the full record. She was charged with conspiracy to obstruct civil proceedings and accessory to witness intimidation. Her parents helped with bail. I didn't offer to. Stanton called me when the charges were filed and read me the counts slowly, the way he does when he wants the weight of something to land properly. 4 to 6 years if it goes to trial and they push for the upper range, he said. She'll probably negotiate a plea. But she's going to plead to something real. And Nash? Separate case. The investor fraud alone is going to follow him for a very long time. I sat with that for a while. 21 years. A marriage I'd thought was a foundation and turned out to be, structurally speaking, something closer to a facade, all surface presentation and nothing load-bearing underneath. I didn't feel triumphant sitting there. I didn't feel much of anything right away. The feelings catch up with you later, when you finally slow down enough to let them. I called Nell. She answered on the second ring. "Are you doing all right?" I asked. "He came by the diner again yesterday. I've been staying in the apartment." A pause. It's good here, though. I'm okay. Has he found the apartment? No, I don't think he knows about it. I want to tell you something, and I want you to hear it clearly. You don't owe me anything for that apartment. Not now, not ever. If you want to leave tomorrow, you can. But if you want to stay and feel safer, I know someone who handles protective orders in this county, and he's very good at his job. She was quiet for a moment. You've been managing a lot of things this week. I have. For other people, too. Some for myself, some for other people. I paused. Is that a problem? No, she said. No, I think it's just who you are. We talked for another 20 minutes, about nothing much in particular. She'd found a farmer's market near the apartment and had started going on Saturday mornings. She liked one vendor who sold small batch hot sauce and didn't push conversation on her. I said I'd be back in town by the weekend and asked if she'd want company at the market. She said she'd think about it. She met me there Saturday at 8:30, wearing a denim jacket and a wide-brimmed hat, pulled low against the morning sun. She was standing at a table of heirloom tomatoes when I came up beside her, and she didn't look startled. She looked like she'd half expected me, which I took as a good sign. You came, she said. You said maybe. I took the optimistic interpretation. She smiled at that, the full kind, the kind that takes up the whole face. The bruise on her temple had faded to almost nothing. We walked the whole market. She bought hot sauce and a jar of local honey. I bought a bag of peaches I didn't particularly need. We got coffee near the end of the row and stood in a patch of shade and talked about things that had nothing to do with lawyers or asset restructuring or men in canvas jackets. At some point I said, I don't know what I'm doing, for the record, in general. That makes two of us, she said. I know I don't want to go back to the life I had. I want to build something again, but I haven't decided what yet. Something big? Something honest, I think. Smaller, probably. Less performative. She nodded slowly. I looked up your firm, she said. You built some significant things. I did. I'm proud of those. I'm less proud of some of the other things I built, without noticing they were hollow. She looked at me with the directness she had, the kind that comes from a person who spent recent time getting very clear on what's real and what isn't. You're not what I expected when you walked into the diner, she said. What did you expect? Someone having a bad night, not someone actually rethinking everything. Both, I think, both at the same time. She considered that. Both, she agreed. Her ex-husband was served with a protective order the following week. He violated it once and was arrested. Last I heard, he'd gone back to Raleigh to deal with the consequences. The divorce was finalized 9 months after the gala. Marlene pleaded guilty to a reduced charge and received a 3-year sentence, 1 suspended. Nash Corbin's investor fraud case went to trial and he was convicted on 6 counts. The consulting reimbursements were entered as evidence in both proceedings. My son and daughter took the whole thing with the resilience that young adults develop when they've had enough time to form their own views of both parents. My daughter told me over dinner the month after the plea that she'd always sensed something was wrong at home, but hadn't known how to name it. I didn't ask her to elaborate. I was just glad she felt she could say it out loud. Nell and I drove up to the mountains in the spring. A long weekend, nothing planned. We walked and ate too much and sat on a bench in a small town square one afternoon, listening to an old man play fiddle for whoever happened to be passing by. At some point she put her head on my shoulder, easy and unself-conscious, and I sat there, thinking about all the years I'd spent carefully maintaining things, without ever stopping to ask whether the things I was maintaining were worth keeping. I wasn't going to make that mistake again. My plans had not gone anything like I intended when I drove away from that gala in my tuxedo. I'd set out to protect what I'd built, and in the process I'd let most of it go. The house, the social calendar, the version of myself that kept showing up to events and calling it a life. I'd ended up in a diner at 11 at night, talking to a woman with a healing bruise and a name tag that wasn't her own name, and somehow that turned out to be exactly where I needed to be. I couldn't have planned that, and I was glad I hadn't tried.